Hi everyone, I'm Perry. Welcome to Living Your Best Life with Eddie Stone, founder and CEO of Touchstone Essentials. Hello, Eddie.
Hi, Perry. So nice to be with you in the audience this evening.
Yeah, nice to see you too here, Eddie. And how are you? Sorry.
You know what? I'm doing well. I want to say that there were quite a few people that watched last week's show
Yeah.
that really had some interesting comments and questions about my time in Washington, D.C. at Organic Week. Last week, they reached out through social media. And so first, I really appreciate the fact that people are sort of paying attention to the details, probably talking about a trip to Washington to participate in Organic Week isn't the most exciting thing. But it really shows a sign to me that a lot of the people that are listening to your shows really care, not just about the impact of what they're eating and, kind of the examples they're setting for their kids and their family and what they're buying, but they're also conscientious of the fact that, how you spend your money and the types of food you buy is really sort of financially supporting different types of farmers. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a real important consideration. Sometimes the world is so big. I don't know if you ever think that in Thailand, but the government, or it's all just so big and the corporations so big, it's hard to feel like that your own individual vote has an impact. But I know that collectively, when we all work together, not just our vote, I always think the vote counts, but our voting with our dollars, right? How we spend our money is also an impact. And so not everybody thinks about it the same way, but I did have a lot of people that really connected to what we were talking about. And I'll continue to work on additional information we're putting out via social media, as well as on our blog. For those that do want to do some additional reading, they can search the term organic on our blog site. So if they go to our website, thegoodinside.com, and they go to the community tab, I think it's the third tab over, if I'm not mistaken, on the top. But if they then put their mouse on top of that, it will open up and they see blog, and there's a search bar there, and they can just type in the word organic and they'll learn quite a bit, or they'll pick up and highlight some articles on that subject. And then additionally, there were people that asked the impact of that on the supplements and vitamins, things like green juices and others. And so if they typed in the word organic vitamin or just the word vitamin, there's also articles that will talk about the difference between conventionally prepared supplements, which are really the tradition, versus things that are whole food, plant-based, things of that nature. So, no matter where you fall on your decision or what you might purchase either from us or someone else, I think it's important to always educate yourself. And we try to first do that. So hopefully that will answer some of the questions, but really do appreciate all the support from last week.
Mm-hmm. And I got an email from Marilyn Kaliman saying, I love your show with Perry. This week from last week, hearing about the Organic Week. It is awesome to hear about the changing tides concerning our health. Anyway, CBD has so many great health benefits that the anti-inflammatory and anxiety are huge benefits. There are many that use it for seizures and to treat autism. Tons of stories out there saying after just a few hours, children are calmer and able to focus. Thanks again for continuing the fight for a healthier world.
That's great to hear. That's very nice. One of the keys there that she said and observed is the impact of inflammation. And we'll talk about that a little bit on our subject today. But, if the body is reactionary and inflamed, whether you're a child or an adult, it gets in the way of your immune system and proper body function. So low inflammatory diets, as well as things like CBD oil, which have shown the ability to temporarily relieve inflammation, can really make a difference. And she mentioned autism. We are, by no means do we make any kind of claims of treatment or the mitigation of disease, but we do hear from parents that give us their personal feedback on low inflammatory diets, using things like CBD, and seeing behavior improvement with their kids. I don't know how that can be scientifically measured, but certainly parents that are with a child every day, day in and day out, I'm sure they notice whenever they do something that the child's behavior gets better. And so I'm really optimistic about some of the research we're going to see in the years ahead about CBD oil. In the U.S. last week, our Food and Drug Administration held its first official open forum discussion about CBD oil as they begin to put together regulations. It's interesting that hemp oil and CBD, while legal, doesn't really have a lot of regulations associated with it. And in this case, some regulations would be useful because it can create some standards for growing and standards for products. So when the consumer buys a CBD oil product, they can sort of rely on something related to the label. So I really think over the years ahead, we're really going to find out some wonderful things and just see CBD oil really everywhere because it seems to have a lot of terrific usages. I'm a big fan. So
now in America, in every state can use CBD oil, right? It's legal now, right, Eddie?
Well, there about 80% of the states have regulations that recognize it, and I guess you could say officially call it legal. Just like we've got about a half dozen or so states that allow recreational marijuana, that it's legal. But there are some states that don't really have clear regulations, and so it can be up to local police or local government officials to say if it's legal or not legal. And in most cases, they're really only trying to keep recreational marijuana from being categorized as CBD. So somebody's essentially buying something to intoxicate them instead of a health product. And so they're trying to sort through those rules and regulations. 80% of the states have a framework that works and allows a company like ours that are selling, we have both a compliant THC product and a zero THC product, to easily sell that into those states. But there's a few of them where it's just a gray area, if that makes sense. But I feel like in the next several months, I think those things will sort themselves out and we'll begin to see a separation for those health products that are not designed to get people intoxicated, but instead properly impact their health. Recreational products, that'll be a separate issue for states to decide, and that'll lag behind regulations relative to CBD. Mm-hmm.
And I hope that soon in my country can be open to use CBD oil too, this kind of product.
We're because of our interest in getting our product line and other things we have registered in Thailand, we've had a couple of interactions with law and regulatory bodies, let's call it. And it does look like CBD and products like that are really being looked at, and they're trying to figure out what the regulations should be, and they recognize their citizens want the product. So I think you should be optimistic.
Yeah. Okay. I did have a question from Christine Lepage asking something safe for a 5-year-old who has cystic fibrosis. This is my granddaughter. She was diagnosed at a month old. She has 2 types of cystic fibrosis. She has lots of meds and antibiotics.
Well, boy, my heart goes out to her and her granddaughter and daughter and a son-in-law that are working with that child. Cystic fibrosis is a very difficult disease. For adults that are diagnosed, but much less for children. They can often find themselves not really understanding completely what's wrong. I'm sure at 5, though, this child does. And it can be a difficult disease to manage. I know they take a lot of medications, a lot of antibiotics and others just to try to deal with the common and frequent infections that they face, that really they're very vulnerable to disease in their lungs. Probably in a situation like that, it's of paramount importance to really think about a clean diet, as much of a clean plant-based diet as they can manage and that the child will consume, because the immune system of the child is really critical to try to nurture and take care of. I would imagine that the physicians that they're working with, and they probably are working with physicians, there's probably a team of people that provide care for that child, encourage a clean diet. If they don't have physicians doing that, they should probably find some others, because that would be sort of a first place to start with anybody, adult or child, that's struggling with immune issues and things like cystic fibrosis. I only have a little bit of experience with that, but the experience that I have is I have seen some people report, and this is anecdotal, getting some relief with a detox diet, heavy on greens. I've even heard of some people using zeolite products in situations like that. But in all cases, no matter what nutritional remedies or diets or things that people would look to try to institute or include in the child's life, they should talk long and carefully with their physician just to make sure that the team that's providing professional care is aware of what the parents are thinking about. The good news is on things like a zeolite or CBD or greens drinks or things of this kind, they don't have contraindications. And so there's a lot of safety there, but they want to work very closely with the child's physicians to coordinate any type of natural solutions that they're thinking about.
Maybe for all kind of disease and illness, is it possible if we can boost our immune system? Does it help?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty safe assumption. Where it would be tricky is if we're talking about autoimmune diseases, where essentially the immune system has been triggered and it's overly active. And so rheumatoid arthritis, for example, is something that adults face, sometimes young adults face, where their immune system is acting against itself and creating all types of very difficult inflammatory responses that lead to challenges associated with arthritis. In cases like that, often the medications that show promise for those individuals are immune suppressors. You even see some chemo drugs that are used in cancer used with people with RA. And so this is something where you've got to make sure your personal circumstances, the ideas that you're thinking about are discussed with a physician or the team of physicians you're getting care from, because this can be so individualized how one person's body reacts, another's reacts different. I've got a couple neighbors both that deal with RA, for example, which is an autoimmune disease I'm talking about. One's body responds incredibly well to exercise, and both through medication and vigorous exercise, they've been able to tamp down the symptoms, and the quality of life is good. Another, they didn't seem to respond to exercise. They're still in sort of the early stages figuring out what to do with the types of medications. And so it's, I think we can always think to ourselves that good nutrition is a good idea, right? Good nutrition can bring balance to the body, can create an environment for homeostasis. And so no matter what disease you're fighting, it likely would be useful. But we always want to make sure that we're talking with the physicians in case what somebody's dealing with from a disease standpoint is just opposite of what we think. And so they want to make sure they're talking with their physician.
And any kind of food or any kind of nutrition that we should can help us boosting the immune system?
Well, I know folks that listen to us think I'm a broken record, but I believe in a largely plant-based diet. As much fruits and vegetables as you can. Sometimes people think, oh, I can't get enough protein. That's not true. You can add grains or other protein sources if they don't like grains, including just beans, legumes, or whatever to get the protein that they need. But a largely plant-based diet seems to always be a good idea. And the opposite of that, and just think of that as opposite, is an ultra-processed sort of fast food diet. The more processed, the more packaged, the more odd a food looks compared to what it might have looked like in nature, right? That's sort of one rule of thumb. And the other one that I refer to is if you're buying food that doesn't spoil, if you're buying something at your grocery that you can buy it and put it on your shelf and come back in 3 months and it's still crispy or it's still good in that regard, that's probably not a good idea. Things should spoil. And that spoiling process means they have less preservatives and chemicals. And remember, oftentimes when you're eating these preservative-laden foods, it's almost like preserving your insides. It really messes with your digestive system. So I'm, a plant-based diet as much as possible, and avoiding the ultra-processed foods is the way to go.
So very best is to eat organic food, right? All kind of.
When organic is available and a person can afford it, I just think that's an easy decision to make.
Uh-huh. Okay, Eddie, and today what are you going to bring us for your...
Well, based upon some questions from your audience, it seems like we get a lot of questions about the immune system and the impacts of toxicities. I thought I would talk, and we can do this pretty briefly, but I thought I would talk about sort of 5 things a person can do if they're managing or dealing with brain fog. And I realize that brain fog is probably not the most scientific sort of description or statement we can make about the human body's condition. But I imagine most people that are listening to us have had that moment where they're just not thinking clearly. It's not that they're not smart, or they don't know what 2 + 2 is, or they don't know how to drive the car directions to somebody's house or something like that. But you can just find yourself sort of flummoxed, and something you should know isn't easily recalled, or you're scrambling around looking for your car keys or your wallet or your purse, right? And that never happens to you, right? Or you're forgetful. All of a sudden you've got a poor memory, and you've always had a great memory. And the thing I encourage people to think about is that is something that's happening. It's real, but it shouldn't happen. And there's probably a reason. And I'll give you sort of the 5 most common reasons. And the first one, I would hope for our audience that's seen us multiple times, it's environmental toxins. Heavy metals, environmental pollutions, volatile organics, all of these things can get in the way and be disruptive of the brain's neurofunction. And a sort of a simple way to think about that is if you think about children or even adults that are exposed to lead poisoning, one of the things we know is there's record and research to demonstrate it can lower someone's IQ. And unfortunately, if it's prolonged, that can have a permanent impact, particularly on a child's development, even after detoxification or the lead levels have been reduced. And so here's a rule of thumb. As a child or an adult, avoid exposures to toxins as much as possible. I see people that work around heavy exhaust for trucks or cars or lawn equipment or whatever it happens to be. If that's how you earn your living or it's what you do, wear a mask. You might think the mask looks goofy, but wear the mask. I've traveled enough in Asia, and I've traveled enough in China sometimes when the pollution is visible, right? When you walk outside your hotel room, and I see the people wearing the mask, and I applaud them, right? Do things to avoid or at least manage exposure if you can't eliminate it. And then secondly, detoxify. If you're not going to detoxify with something like a zeolite or a chelating agent of some kind, just think about increasing your intake of fruits and vegetables, particularly greens, because they aid the body in detoxification. So that's sort of the first thing I would say there. And then maybe the last one is those fruits and vegetables also can provide powerful antioxidants to fight oxidative stress that can be associated with environmental toxins. So one of the 5 then is to think about the role of environmental toxins and trying to avoid it as much as possible. The second one is to consider vitamin deficiencies. And I know for me, not so much these days, I'm in much more control of my environment and my diet than I once was. Back in the 90s, I traveled so frequently back and forth from the States to Europe and to Asia, and I felt like I almost lived on an airplane, right? And so I was eating a lot of processed food, all the things I'm talking about not doing. When you eat a lot of those processed foods, they're generally not nutrient rich, right? And so you can find yourself nutrient deficient, particularly B vitamins, vitamin D, some of these things that can impact the function of your central nervous system, your energy levels, and your immune system. And so you might be eating but you might be eating empty calories. And if you're eating those empty calories, when I say empty calories, I mean things that are lacking that nutrient density day in and day out, you're not going to sleep as well, and you're not going to perform as well mentally and or physically. So one of the solutions there to consider is if your diet's not good and you're not thinking clearly, these two things are related. Connect those dots and start to do what you can to eat a more balanced diet. I always talk about greens. I believe heavily in it. If you don't like greens, then get something like our green juice and slug that down. If you don't like ours, find somebody's that you do. But just consider that. And then maybe one more thing to think about is sometimes when you're having that spell of a poor diet, you're not digesting food well. You may find yourself constantly with indigestion. And you eat a meal and you feel bloated 2 or 3, 4 hours later, which you shouldn't. Food should empty out of your primary stomach cavity in approximately an hour's period of time. And so if it's lingering, then you're not digesting well. Instead of grabbing an antacid, which is sort of the first thing that people do, look for a plant-based digestive enzyme. They're very widely available all over the world and not expensive. And they can save you a lot of time and trouble during the course of the day, help to keep you off of those antacids, which can create longer-term problems. And so number 2 is when you're dealing with brain fog, think about your diet and nutrient deficiencies and the role they could play. The third one is inactivity. If you find yourself sort of mentally sluggish, very often it's a lack of proper oxygenated blood flow because you've just not been active. Get up from your desk or get up from what you're doing and go for a brisk walk. If you're not in a place where a brisk walk is possible, find some steps to climb. If it's 10 steps, go up and down, up and down, up and down. Find something to get the blood flowing. If you can incorporate a regular exercise routine, it's one way to improve your brain health. There are very few things that we can say definitively positively impact brain health. Exercise is one of those. The evidence is clear. Harvard and several other really fantastic, well-respected medical universities have published papers on the role of exercise. And so one of the things that cancels out the brain fog is exercise. And the more vigorous it can be, such that it can be something like an intensity, a high intensity, they call it. Don't let the title of that scare you away. It can increase lung capacity, which increases oxygenated blood flow, and all these things are positive. And so that's number 3 on the list. So number 1 is environmental toxins, 2, nutrient deficiencies. Number 3 is inactivity. Number 4 to watch out for, particularly if you're feeling sort of mentally sluggish, is the role of chronic stress. If you're either in a personal relationship that's chronically stressful, if you're in a work environment that's chronically stressful, if you're in a family environment that's chronically stressful, just know that over time, quite literally, that can help to temporarily lower your IQ because you're so caught up with emotions. Your hormones are so heightened. You're probably producing excess amounts of cortisol and other sort of defense hormones and things that you produce that it can get in the way of the function of the brain. So meditate if you can. Drink less caffeine-oriented beverages, right? So the answer on something like that is if you're chronically stressed and you're not thinking clearly, don't grab a Red Bull. That's not the answer. Do something maybe that's very low caffeine that you would think of kind of slowing things down. And if you can get your hands on some hemp oil, some CBD oil, do it. That's also something that I think most would find helpful. And then number 5, the last thing I'll mention is sleep deprivation. Just like we know that exercise is clinically proven to positively impact the health of the brain, so is proper sleep. And for a lot of people, they may be lying down in bed for 6 or 7 hours, but the stress and they're not falling asleep and they're getting up in the middle of the night and they wake up before the alarm clock, their effective amount of sleep is just very modest. If you want a wake-up call to this and you have access to one of those Apple watches or the like, most of those types of watches have sleep monitors that can really let you see, the quality of sleep you're getting or the lack thereof. You need quality sleep. So limiting your screen time, particularly when you're trying to go to bed, finding a way to wind down, whether that's meditation. Heck, read a boring book if that's what's necessary to get yourself slowed down enough to sleep. And you know, if you find you don't sleep well, do what you can to avoid stimulants in the last half of the day. At a certain point, there's a lot of people that they can drink some coffee in the morning, but they can't drink it in the afternoon because it affects their sleep. And so listen to your body and pay attention, because you need rest, just like you need to manage stress, you need exercise, you need good food, and you need to watch, you can't watch toxins. All of these things affect the performance of your brain, just like they really affect the entirety of the body. And so I know we had some folks asking some questions about this. And so I wanted to make sure we got that out tonight and give them sort of 5 tips on fighting brain fog.
Okay, thank you so much, Eddie, for being here. And all this kind of information, Eddie, can we find on your blog too, for the knowledge?
Yeah, various pieces and articles. Maybe I should get this written up into a blog post. But in various bits and pieces, all this information is there. I think there's 100+ pieces. And so if you're curious about your health, and there's a good one that has just come out today about the role of the simple blueberry in fighting heart disease, right? So man, Mother Nature's got some great answers. So I encourage people to go there and do some reading. They can learn about good health practices.
Okay, Eddie, thank you so much for being here with us. So we see you again next week, next time, okay?
Next week, Perry. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.